kind of thing.
But he's got to sign up on it.
Tom, you guys sign off from Leo. Absolutely.
Because I talked to Leo, it's probably over.
webpage on lewispalmer.org through which members of the public can find live streaming information and meeting records, as well as presentations and resources which will be reviewed and discussed during this meeting. Ms. Wood, could you call roll, please?
Here.
Here.
Here?
Here.
If you all could join me in Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have one non-agenda item to take care of now, and that's if you'll join me, and we're going to sing Happy Birthday to Will. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Will. Happy birthday to you, and many more.
Tell you what, yeah.
No, not hired.
We perform nightly. Just want to let you know.
This is how we roll.
Yep. Just tips.
Happiest day to you. And I think he had an announcement he wanted to share too.
Only thing I was going to say is, I since this is how I spend the morning of my birthday, I brought in some of Denver's finest donuts. If anyone would like any, we got various flavors and plates. So, thank you.
And then the second announcement he had, I'm fishing, obviously.
Second announcement. I recently got engaged.
Congratulations.
I did not expect this morning, so thank you.
Was it because of the donuts?
All happening.
Yeah. I tell you what, it's a nice touch.
That's what happens if you get here 5 minutes early and share information.
Yeah, I'll tell you that. No. Welcome.
All right, let's hop right into our, I'm sorry, I have one more announcement, and that is at 8:30 I have to step away for a few minutes, 15 perhaps, and don't worry, I'm okay, and just continue on, please. If anything needs to be done, Dr. Summers can continue the meeting.
Happy to, thank you.
So with that, Chris Coulter is going to provide us a facilities and operations update.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much. I want to welcome everybody to September 6, 2022. And we are at the best time of the year. We are in the heart of college football season. So everybody should be happy. We'll go ahead and get started. Again, we're focusing on planning. We're not making, sort of any financial decision making or anything relative to that, but just wanted to make sure everybody understands where we're headed, how we're going to get there, what are the necessary steps to achieve the type of success that we're looking for. So what is capital planning? Capital project planning in this sense. Capital planning is about distributing potential future resources for projects in the future. Those being school-based projects as a part of a documented strategic facilities plan. The strategic facilities goals determine short-term tactical project plans, next fiscal year's projects, as well as, based upon urgency, and we'll talk a little bit about urgency and criticality. We'll talk about that in terms of the matrix of decision-making as we get a little bit further forward, including prioritization of annual facilities projects. But what we deliver here is what I'm suggesting is a 3-year project plan. So we have the immediate projects for the next fiscal year, the immediate next fiscal year, and then we're going to be looking 2 years ahead and sort of how we blend, how we mold all that together so that we can deliver a 3-year overall capital project plan. How do we, one, maintain facilities in excellent condition? That's one of the excellent condition is one of those metrics associated with what's called a FCI, or a Facility Condition Index, and we'll take a look at that, as well as look at even a way to look at what's called Extended Facility Condition Index, which I think is more appropriate. We will also blend that into what's called a Facility Needs Index, but not to get too much into the weeds. And then in terms of facility maintenance, comprehensive stewardship is our approach. If that is our approach, is that how we behave today? And we'll take a look at a few things relative to that. And how do you achieve comprehensive stewardship? What does it take to get there? And what steps are going to be taken by Lewis Palmer to do so? I know this is difficult to see, and I apologize. But the UCC, I sort of have this history in higher education, where it's all about, where it certainly is all about first impressions, and we certainly. In K-12, we certainly have a little bit different tact in terms of where we're looking, but these are some of the things associated with a third-party audit that was done by, as you can see in the lower right there, Smith Group, which is a very, very large architectural firm, nationally recognized. That they came in and took a look at what was going on, but you can see where their focus areas were. Those two highlighted sections there. You can't see them too well, but the one to the sort of off to the right a little bit, where it talks about the condition of the facilities are in very, very poor condition, and to have that documented in a facility assessment by a third-party architect is one of those things that we. Again, just like what the title of the slide says, things that we want to avoid. So how do you do that? On the other item that is sort of highlighted in the upper left, it really talks mostly about what you are doing to accommodate what's going on with students, what's going on to make sure that they are accommodated, because at the end of the day, where are students spending an awful lot of their time? It's not so much, especially in higher education, in the classroom, it's doing other things, and we want to make sure that the students that are on our campuses in Lewis Palmer, doing other things, that they are accommodated in such a way that those are the things that they're talking about when they go home to talk to mom and dad. Another slide that sort of talks a little bit about what drives students' attendance, especially in higher education. Let's face it, in higher education, it's not like they're completely different humans, when they go to higher education from when they are in the K-12 environment. But 62% of students are selecting schools based on first impression. It is well documented that students make a decision as to whether or not a university or college institution is going to stay on their list after spending exactly 10 to 15 minutes on campus. That's all it takes to determine whether or not they're going to actually make that particular university or college campus a part of a place where they are going to apply. They are learning that, and they are learning some of those things when they are in K-12. So what they see, what they do, what they are able to do as a part of the other things that students are doing is a part of their analysis. Just a couple of examples of things that we've tried to do to improve that first impression component. On the right-hand side, you see that's the former Lewis Palmer High School greeting. On the left-hand side, you can't see it incredibly well, but there's a lot of improvements over there for a very, very economical price in terms of the entrance. I mean, what we did in terms of the landscaping, in terms of the marquee there at Lewis Palmer High School, it's lit in the evenings now as well. It just gives a whole different feel for that particular school, and you feel like you must have gone through a multi-million-dollar renovation. Now, granted, that it's one of those things that I'm certainly very, very partial to. But at the same time, I think we had an awful lot of contracted support to make sure that this was successfully delivered, and delivered in such a way that we really focus on making sure that students, the administration, teachers really sort of felt a type of welcoming that they deserve. You can see on the left-hand side, that is great. This is the gymnasium at Grace Best, and these are some projects that were recently accomplished by our partners at Schneider Electric. But you can see some of the things on the right-hand side. That is the improvements that we saw with the added LED fixtures in that particular space. It feels like we've completely built in an entirely new gym, whereas on the left-hand side is the way it used to be, very, very shaded, very, very shadowy, and just didn't have the same feel relative to what was going on in that particular space. But again, these are the spaces that students sort of find themselves, either accustomed to or attracted to for one reason or another. And this is one more example of that first impression aspect that was done at a very, very economical price. Okay, so in terms of project urgency, so where do we want to be? We talked about a little bit earlier, a couple slides ago, we talked about being in that comprehensive stewardship era. I would argue that today we are probably a little bit more in a reactive management approach. In terms of preventative maintenance, in terms of routine maintenance, those are things that we certainly do in terms of changing filters, changing belts, and things like that, absolutely. But at this time, we're not in a situation where we really have a robust financial approach to making sure that necessary repairs and or capital renewal associated with things that we find coming out of a preventative maintenance program are a part of what's going on, and that's where we want to be. So that's our approach that we'd like to adopt in terms of that comprehensive stewardship approach, and that may there may be some resources, some human resources aspects associated with that we have to consider. This is what I mentioned earlier about criticality and determining urgency. You'll see on the upper row on the far right, it sort of says very, very poor condition. On the left-hand side, you see at the bottom, it says very high impact. So between impact and urgency, time to failure, and degree that it affects the mission criticality associated with what is trying to be accomplished in a classroom or in a school, that's how we will move forward in terms of determining how we sort of distribute that comprehensive stewardship approach, instead of sort of being in a situation where, hey, let's see what work orders we get today. No, it's one of those things where we are out and we are sort of we are in front of those types of things in a preventative maintenance and repair role. While there will be some things that we have to react to, but hopefully by being out in front on many things that we know of, and we know our spaces, we know our buildings, we know what's above the ceilings, we know what's in the walls, we can be in a situation where we are sort of anticipating those locations where we need repairs, and so schools are not in a situation where they have to shut anything down or sort of be without something for any amount of time. So what do we want to do? We want to look at, we mentioned a little bit earlier, we looked at that facility condition index, which is just your current backlog of deferred maintenance projects, and you divide that in terms of the mathematical equation, you divide that by what's called the CRV, or the current replacement value of that particular facility. And as we all know, current replacement value for schools today, probably 10 years ago when I was building schools, we were building schools for $200, $225 a square foot. Today that's more in line of $400 to $500 a square foot when you start talking about the total replacement value. When you start talking about what we call stuff and things, the FF&E, that's a custom, and that's part of what's going on in our institutions. So I would argue, and that's why I've sort of highlighted that on the right-hand side, we need to be a little bit more focused on what I would say a blend between EFCI, extended facility condition index, and the facility needs index. And what we try to sort of blend in there are things like audio-visual accommodations, network accommodations, those things related to capital improvements, because the things that are changing most rapidly today in our 21st century academic environment are classrooms, pedagogy, the things that we want to be able to deliver to students, the things that teachers are bringing to the table and programs are bringing to the table. A lot of times those things are actually changing much more rapidly than mechanical or electrical systems. So those are the things that we sort of have to be mindful of, and that's why a blended approach with between EFCI and facility needs is sort of what we want to do going forward. And so how do we measure that? Well, I'm glad you asked. Here it is. To maintain an excellent condition, which we talked about a little bit earlier, we want to be between 0 and 20% of the CRV when looking at EFCI, or that blend between EFCI and facility needs. I think we have to be empirical with respect to how we are doing things. Otherwise, how do we know where we want to focus? If in fact we have a facility that is in, let's say a 51% of CRV situation, that's, or what we're we're describing here as poor, that's where we need to focus. And so what do we do to move from poor condition to fair condition and then to excellent condition? And that's going to be the nature of our approach as we move forward with our schools. Okay, into the details. So what do we need to do? We need to conduct a district-wide facilities audit, capturing both facilities and grounds needs. And I'm very, very much about grounds, and we talked a little bit about that earlier. Certainly when you drive up to on a school campus, what is the first thing you see? You see the grounds, whether it be the parking lot, whether it be the fields, whether it be the playground, whether it be just the general nature of how you are met by what is going on, the signage and wayfinding, very, very important aspects of what's going on, the lighting, the general nature depending on the time of day that you arrive. Establish a district-wide facility and ground standards. We need to document that, and we need to establish that. If you don't have a standard, then how do we measure and how do we sort of gauge excellent, fair, poor, and critical? Establish programs to be included, and this is schematic. What I would call a per pupil building program. Schools, have teams to establish and prioritize the projects delivered. If we were to ask all of our principals, what are your projects? I'm sure they would be a little bit different from what a third-party engineering auditor is going to come in and say. These are the critical priorities of your institution, of what's going on. They know what's going on in the classrooms. They know what's going on in the gyms. They know what's going on in the playgrounds. They know what their parents are looking for. So a per-pupil building program is something that certainly should be a part of it. Facility audit. That's that item that I just mentioned. What's above your ceilings? What's in your walls? What's in the ground? What's in the roads? What's the utility infrastructure associated with your facility? What do we need to do, as well as energy management and energy efficiency? We can continue to always sharpen the saw associated with energy efficiency and make things, and we are certainly, with respect to our sustainability program that we are starting now, schools are going to be much more involved in sort of developing a comprehensive approach, including both conservation and energy efficiency approaches as we move forward. And then certainly capital construction, that item I mentioned. What 2021, what capital construction is today is very, very different than what it was just as long as 2, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, as well as what is a comprehensive facility, a new capital construction project need to include. Those things and what's going on in classrooms, what's going on with technology, what's going on with infrastructure. All of those things are sort of continuing to move the needle a little bit forward relative to per square foot costs. Select construction project delivery methodology. What does that mean? Hard bid. Are we just going to go with low bid type stuff? Or do we want to negotiate our projects because we feel very, very comfortable with the team that we have surrounded ourselves with? Do we want to go with the construction management GC, the CMGC concept, which is essentially a negotiated concept, if in fact you do have that CM and GC type of capability by the general contractor? And then one of the things that we've talked a little bit about, we mentioned it earlier, design build. There are lots of different concepts around design build. There's design build bridging, there's architect-led design build, there's general contractor-led design build. It's kind of like when you show up at the restaurant, well, so what kind of design build do you want? You want cheese with that type of a thing. But at the same time, there are right ways and wrong ways to do design build, and what design build requires the owner to be much more capable. It's not a panacea. You can't just walk into design build as XYZ owner and be successful. You got to be able to understand what's going on, and you need to have standards. And we mentioned that a little bit earlier. You need to have sort of construction standards, architectural, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing standards, and ground standards that you want to sort of achieve. And design build, if you have all those things and you have the people to talk about those things in such a way that you can provide the necessary direction, design build might be a choice for you. And then district project management. How are we going to project management these things? We don't have a project management staff right now. We have a few people within our facilities and our maintenance and ground side of things that certainly expand out and do a little bit more than just their core competency. But something like a big bond program or something to that effect, a consideration would need to be given in terms of how that's going to be delivered. District infrastructure and facilities needs. The first step is ensuring a thorough and documented understanding of the district's needs and goals. I would recommend that we bring in a third party, a contracted third party, which I'll talk a little bit about a little bit later. We already have proposals from a third party that does know our district to talk about everything from A to Z. Related to facility infrastructure and where we want to go. Some of the things that we need to look at is infrastructure, data, networking, safety and security, all those types of things that certainly aren't bricks and mortar or rebar and concrete, but they are things that make sure that our schools, knowing the 24/7 capability that they need to provide to students, teachers, administrators, and the community, is done in such a way that it is absolutely cutting edge type of infrastructure and deliverables. Things we need to look at in addition: kitchen equipment, those service components, buses and fleet vehicles equipment. We need to consider those types of things because our district is getting bigger, and the number of things that we are doing to accommodate transportation needs, infrastructure needs, catering needs, kitchen needs, and things of that nature are continuing to grow. And then safety and security systems, a safety and security system that is ubiquitous, that is easy to utilize. We do have a safety and security system here in Lewis Palmer School District, but making sure that it is integrated across all of our schools, both our sort of existing schools as well as what might be happening in the realm that I'm describing right here, new schools, doing so in such a way that the left hand and the right hand are working very, very well together. Facilities service functions. So where do we want to be? Do we want to be in purely a catch-up where we just look at FCI? I would doubt it if we just want to be in a catch-up mentality. We are somewhere between a keep-up. We would like to be somewhere between a keep up and get ahead, and that's that EFCI and facility needs side of things, where we're more focused on improvements and renewal to the infrastructure associated with what's going on in our buildings. Deliverables. So what do we need to do? What do we need to deliver? A facility condition assessment and asset inventory. We need, again, that's that documented starting point that we can share across the district, gather feedback from the community, from parents, from everybody involved to make sure that it is accurate and it accurately represents where we want to go. Evaluation of all documented assets. You know, where are we relative to buses? Where are we relative to our kitchen equipment? Where are we relative to the energy investment, operating investment that we have across all of our schools and across the district? And then again, building systems, equipment inventory. We need to make sure that if we are going to have a preventative maintenance plant program, we need to have a cutting edge documented equipment inventory associated with what's going on. What do we have in our buildings? What's the age of that equipment? What's the refurbishment timeline associated with that equipment? And then making sure that we have the team around us with respect to the human resources that we have in the district to make sure that we are keeping up, because those types of mechanical, electrical, and equipment changes are happening very, very rapidly. So we need to make sure our training is where it needs to be, but we also need to make sure the preventative maintenance and making sure that we are keeping up on repairs and continuing to make sure spaces can be inhabited and by children, as well as making sure the usefulness of that space for teachers and for administrators is what we want it to be. Anticipated added services, we talked a little bit about. I've got some third-party estimates actually from its organization. It used to be School Dude, but they actually have a long history here at Lewis Palmer in terms of understanding our infrastructure, understanding our schools, understanding our square footage. Very, very important. So what we did is we asked them what would it take to conduct a facility condition assessment, based on about 1 million square feet. That's where we are. So the price that they gave us is 11 cents per square foot. Again, this is a one-time cost. This is that initial swag at what it's going to take to go ahead and document where we want to go, what's the condition of our inventory, of our equipment inventory, and making sure that we are well prepared to address what's going on over the course of the next 5 or 10 years at a minimum. And they will also provide us, in addition to that facilities condition assessment, a PM schedule based on sort of a preventative maintenance PM schedule associated with those equipment that would typically be supported by 1 million square feet. You're talking about a little over a cent per square foot. That's the one-time cost associated with when they build a PM schedule. So that wouldn't be something that would be an ongoing cost, but they have to build that PM schedule associated with that facility condition assessment from the very beginning. Though both of those are one-time costs that once this happens, then we just build on it from the starting point that they provide us. Asset essentials, that would be additional services. That's looking at all of our facilities and making sure that on an ongoing basis we are able to do the necessary repair and maintenance of those items, and then the consulting to be able to utilize their software. That's again noted there as a one-time investment, but the asset essentials and building that schedule associated with that initial investment of doing a facility audit, about the same price. They're both about $9,500. But again, that consulting implementation is just a one-time cost that would not continue over year to year to year. One of the things that we ask them to do is take a look sort of in blending and sort of to come together with our sustainability program is talk about an energy manager protocol or energy management software, but we do not have an energy management software to sort of make sure that we are tracking in such a way. We have spreadsheets, and when we get the bills, we put those in, and then some things that we can sort of manage, sort of begin to manage things beyond kilowatt hours, begin to manage the nature of a commercial tariff that we find ourselves in when we start talking about demand and kilowatts and things like that. But there's $8,200 on an annual basis to support that. We can actually send them our utility bills, then they actually populate the database, and then hopefully it's one-to-one type of immediacy associated with what's going on there, and there's no lag associated with that. The setup for something like that's $38.80, and again that's just a one-time cost. The immediate investment, the overall immediate investment, facility and preventative maintenance plan, again, we talked a little bit about it earlier, about $120,000. Introduce that asset essentials. Again, that's $18,900 with $9,400. Again, that would be annually after 1 year. That's what we are looking at, just that $9,400. We would introduce the energy management side of things. Again, it's another cloud-based solution. The first time is a little over $12,000, but then it's $8,200 annually afterward. So the overall initial investment, about $150,000. Annual investment after the initial investment is $17,600, and today for the same software system to just manage work orders, sort of be in that purely reactive type situation, we're at just over $13,000 is how much we spend today. So getting all that for $4,000 more is I see that as something that's an investment certainly worth considering. Real quickly, I wanted to talk to you and give you a graphical representation. This is energy management today. Where we are across all of our schools. It talks about both energy management and cost. But you can see we have a couple of schools that are certainly in a situation that we hope to sort of bring that down a little bit. I see this as a lot. It's not a negative thing. It's a lot of opportunities to bring those blue bars down to a place that a little bit more accurate, especially building off of what Schneider is doing for us, as well as conservation behaviors and efficiency types of efforts that we will certainly make a part of our sustainability programs. But you can see where we are. We've got a couple of schools where we will probably want, I would argue that these type of graphical representations sort of allow us to sort of focus on a couple of things and not spin our wheels in those other areas where maybe schools are performing incredibly well right now. And then this is just another way of looking at the data that we have is kilowatt hours per student per year. But we have two that definitely, sort of, grab the eye associated with how many kilowatt hours per year at those particular schools, whereas the others, they're kind of all, really in line with each other in terms of what we're consuming at our respective schools. So again, I see this as nothing more than just an opportunity analysis to figure out what's going on. And again, in another year or 6 months, actually pretty quickly, we will actually have these numbers should be coming down relatively, appreciably associated with what Schneider's done for us, especially on the LED side of things and the automation side of things. So the Schneider program status, I know we've got Will here to talk a little bit. Wanted to give everybody a quick recap on where we are, get a little bit of a feel. Over there at our boilers over at the middle school, we're well over 80% complete. It's a $442,000 investment. At the high school, the automation side of things, just under $300,000. We're definitely more than halfway complete, and that's going to be a project that actually is going to extend probably well past, maybe even past Christmas. But that's one of the ones that's a little bit bigger in terms of as we started to get in there, and we did some chiller replacements this past summer as well. We learned a few things about the infrastructure over there that we want to make the necessary accommodations and replacements to make sure that we're delivering a 25 to 50-year solution. The vestibules, we're marketing those at, it's about a $1 million effort, greater than 90% complete. We're just kind of wrapping those things up. All the schools are open. All the schools are utilizing them. Systems are improved to be able to accommodate those spaces in such a way that I think principals are happy. We spent a lot of time this particular summer, for example, making sure those vestibules are everything that they can be. And then the other Schneider scope, that's 7.4, really the bulk of what's going on with the lighting, automation, plug load, reductions, and building automation and making sure that our thermostats are working in a particular realm that we want to accommodate to bring the energy numbers definitely lower than where they are today. If anybody has any comments or questions, I am happy to do my best.
Okay, question for you.
Yes,
Going
sir.
back a few slides, it looked like Bear Creek and Prairie Winds were the highest use of electricity. Prairie Winds, that's kind of a given. What's the anomaly with Bear Creek?
Well, I'll be honest with you, I think it's just, there's a lot of kids over there in terms of just, in terms of accommodations. A lot of things are on, a lot of things are open, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we are doing things associated with occupancy sensors and photo cells, quite honestly. And there's, one of the great things about our schools is we have a ton of natural light coming into our schools. I mean, it feels like you're outside in a lot of our schools. But we don't have the infrastructure in those schools right now where we can accommodate that with reading that natural light in such a way that's sort of turning off fixtures that we no longer need. So I think this is one of those things coming out of the Schneider project that we are going to become a little bit smarter about, but at the same time working with our electrician. Believe me, we're already doing some things related to occupancy sensors and seeing what we can do to automate and sort of taking that responsibility away from whether it be building managers, teachers, or students or things like that in terms of actually having to turn off those lights. But hopefully our sustainability program with the necessary behavior changes, when we're starting that actually. I will be getting information out to all the principals this week, as a matter of fact. That working both mechanically as well as the human aspects and the behavior aspects. Man, I hope to see these numbers significantly reduced when I give this presentation next year.
Okay. And maybe you covered it and I didn't catch it, but is Palmer Ridge and Lewis Palmer High School further along in the automation program? I'm just trying to figure out why Bear Creek we're using so much electricity there. I would argue that Bear Creek's probably a little bit more antiquated in terms of the automation, in terms of the approach. Certainly Palmer Ridge is a little bit further along, but every time I go over there, every single light's on, and the whole school has got more glass than my house or probably most of our houses. So we've got some work to do associated with what's going on over there at all those respective schools. And Prairie Winds is very much in the same situation. I spent a whole bunch of time over there. Actually, as a matter of fact,
fact, last week. And yeah, I mean, the natural light that comes into that particular place is absolutely something to be coveted, but I don't need every single light on in addition to every single, blinds open and things like that. So we've got some things to do. We've got our own homework to do associated with what's going on, whether it be on the automation side. I think that there's a lot of accommodations that can be, a lot of things we can reduce electricity consumption through automation, but also there are some very, very simple things that we can do with very, very simple types of things related to occupancy sensors and photocells.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So piggybacking off of what Matt just said, those are our 3 newest buildings. So I would think that those would be the buildings that would be the most energy efficient. So that's an interesting.
Well, and that I think that, for example, when I was at Colorado College, they declared carbon neutrality just a couple of years ago, and they've got 2 lead buildings, leadership in energy and environmental design. They're 2 lead buildings, or they're 2 poorest performing buildings from an energy side of things. So I think a lot of people sort of wrap themselves around the covers that say, oh, we're lead, but the necessary behaviors and accommodations and the real intensity associated with what you ask the design teams to do, associated with what's going on, instead of just meeting the code, because today is what's called an energy conservation code. Just meeting the code does reduce you from what's called ASHRAE 90.1, and that's the standard. But we want to be well beyond that, and it's not more expensive, it's not cost prohibitive to do so. But you're right, the accommodations and the systems that should be in those buildings should be more energy efficient. So it shouldn't be too much of a stretch to be able to make the necessary tweaks to those systems to get them to behave and to produce better numbers.
So I have a few questions. Teresa, do you have questions?
I have one, but let me listen to yours first.
So I had a few of them. I was curious this goes back to the energy savings, and this might be more of a question for you, Will. When we're still working on getting our work completed on the different schools, how much of that work is your team versus the Lewis Palmer School District team? I want to make sure we're not overburdening our grounds and maintenance team to make sure that we are getting this done versus cost versus manpower. So I just was curious how much breakdown that is.
No, I can say, yeah, from the Lewis Palmer School District perspective, I feel like Schneider has been very accommodating when it comes to sort of requests that we might have to make things easier, to make things more efficient. As a matter of fact, related to some of the stuff that we will be talking with them more, certainly probably more this week, is with these new LED fixtures, adding occupancy sensors and photocells to those new LED fixtures, because they work off of 277 volt power and they have different accommodations associated with those lamps. It's not just a standard occupancy sensor that we can install there. So we are working very, very closely with both John and Will to sort of, hey, what can we do to make sure that those changes can be accommodated seamlessly? It's one of those things where when Schneider gets in here to do an energy service contract and be able to implement, sometimes they don't know exactly what it is that they're inheriting, what the existing infrastructure might be, what are the changes and tweaks that are going to have to occur. So we're working through those things, but I don't see them as 6-month types of things. I see them as probably 6-week types of things to be able to make the necessary accommodation to what's going on. But again, just to answer your question, no, the burden, I feel like that has been on my team, both on the grounds and the maintenance side of things. Has not been significant. I think that they've done it. John and Will have done everything they can, working with their contractors and subcontractors to sort of, definitely put their best foot forward. And if we do have, we have weekly meetings, and if there are issues or anything that we need to describe or put forward, they've been very accommodating.
I'll just add to, like Chris was saying, those weekly meetings, I think just gives, especially not to burden the time on extra manpower, it gives the necessary updates. And most of the time, and I don't know if John can exactly hear me, but he's calling me here. Most of the time, the general updates are what's to be expected from Chris and Leo and the rest of his team. Of things are going well. If there is anything that we need them to be updated on, they have that necessary update, and we can then dedicate time and attention toward it. So we're not just automatically saying, hey, every single week I need you dedicating these 6 people to go here and here and here.
No.
So I think it's coordinated efficiently, where we're not wasting.
and then my next question, I told you I have a series of questions. The update on the gym at Grace Best is great, but I'm still not seeing, we had a team that worked on that comprehensive plan for Grace Best, so how does that fit into all of this?
When you say the team that worked on,
The community team, we hired a third-party contractor to come in and assess. We had a facilitator, we had a community team.
Can I jump in on that one? So this scope of work is broader than just what the future design and plans are at Grace Best. So when we are talking about Grace Best and how the recommendation that came from that committee can be funneled into a bigger comprehensive discussion about facilities, usage, capacity, programming, the work will be parallel to what's happening here. It's not just focused on Grace Best, but it will be part of how we're broadening this focus out. So we would anticipate a pretty clear recommendation in addition to funding. I mean, I have to stress, that's what we don't have right now. So it's like, yes, we have all this great ideas that have come forth. How do we actually have the money to make those things happen? So as we're looking at what are the needs and what are the longer term plans that we have, again, it'll be something that is fit into this overarching concept, but not just exclusive to Grace Best.
If I could build on what Tiffany was asking, because Big Red is really part of facilities, as is the bus barn. So there's more facilities than just the schools. And this presentation is focused only on the active schools, which is good. But there are the rest of the facilities. And I'm kind of inclined to say, let's look at everything. The funding issue on Grace Best is secondary to just, because there is power being used. It is being utilized, homeschool enrichment, et cetera. So it's not like it should be ignored, in my opinion. Is that where you were going?
I'm looking at these schools, and I'm looking at Grace Best being used, and how it's being utilized, and it's a great example. And it made me think of, okay, we've got this entire grounds area that's not in part of this. And Grace Best is the big one in that space. But I also understand it's only one, I understand that Grace Best
component.
is one point in a bigger picture.
And that was the limitation, if you recall, back when we engaged that work. We focused on one site and didn't necessarily address all of the others. So it's time to bring all of that in focus together. And you guys make a good point. It's not just Grace Best. It's not just this administration building. It's everything that represents where we're at with facilities. The other thing that is not really highlighted currently in this presentation is the role that demographics and growth play into the equation. So that has to be a feature of how we're also looking at updates to program capacity, utilization of the buildings, and where does that fit in the longer term conversation about what we're looking at both today as well as tomorrow and several years in the future.
Well, and where I was leading and going with this is, when we're looking at this overall picture, I love the idea of having an inventory for each building, because it's part of the bigger picture. What are our priorities? And that's what I'm looking forward to. Okay, what are our priorities? Because I completely concur, and it breaks my heart that we are in a mode of, we have another hole in the boat, let's put a Band-Aid on it or put a finger in it, instead of being proactive and avoiding the break altogether. So I love the inventory idea, and where I was going with this is figuring out, we don't have a money tree growing anywhere around, so what priorities and how do we determine those priorities?
well, I think that facility, that assessment inventory, the beginning of that, and you're absolutely right. It's not just school based. It's the entire district. Everything would be a part of that from a facility and a ground side of thing. But if I go back to, if you recall those index values. Oh, excuse me. Oh, that way. Just about, there you go. So when we do the assessment, knowing that what the current replacement value is of those schools, we need to figure out what is contributing to a building being in a poor condition or a fair conditioning, or what is it going to take to get them, over the line to sort of the next higher threshold, to move them all towards a more excellent type of status. It might be systems, it might be grounds, it might be architecture, who knows what it might be. But at the same time, I want to give schools the opportunity to sort of inject what they want to see, what they wish were accommodated, what they wish were included in that particular assessment. Because when you just have a lot of mechanical engineers and electrical engineers, God bless them, but at the same time, when you just have them looking at things, they sort of get a little bit their vision gets a little bit more narrow relative to, hey, what would be nice to make sure that that particular space is useful to a greater audience.
I had a couple more, but Teresa, did you want to jump in?
Sure, because it might segue well with the discussion already at hand. In looking at slides 7 and 8, Chris, I know you're seeking to moving the district from reactive management to comprehensive stewardship, if I understood correctly.
That's correct.
And I'm wondering how confident you are that a facility audit will move the district that way, I'm asking based on somewhat on your experience, but then how will we know? What is the timeline for determining where we're at? And I just want to make sure we have stepwise action within the follow-through after the audit.
No, it's a good question. I think it starts with coming out of the facility condition assessment, understanding where we are. Are we in let's say XYZ school, we're in poor condition. Well, let's take a look at utilizing our work order system. Where have the work orders been? I want to do an inventory. Where have all the work orders been? Has it been the exact same work order year after year after year after year? And then we're just not in a situation where we can accommodate that. Maybe we can repair it and get you in a situation where it's going to work for 3 months, but we need to do a larger investment associated with that to sort of move it to a situation where we have a 25-year investment in that particular system, because systems are changing, the energy code is changing. There's a lot of various different things that are going on that are going to, we're going to find ourselves at a different metric going forward. How quickly can something like that be done? I would say the audit they'll be out here for probably just maybe a couple of weeks, 2, maybe 3 weeks, with a team of engineers, probably 10 to 15 engineers, as well as our maintenance folks, myself and others, sort of walking them around and then making sure that we're seeing what they're seeing, that type of a thing. They're also going to want to look at where the work orders have been in the past in those particular buildings. They're going to want to talk to the principal and teachers about what they're seeing and what they're feeling and what they feel like the improvements need to be. But I would argue that if in fact we're looking at milestones, maybe by the winter break holiday, if in fact we were to initiate it right now, that would be something that we would have a complete facility assessment inventory and the data to support where we need to provide the necessary focus and where how much money are we talking about to move those buildings to the next tier up.
Sure, and then I would just encourage us as a board working with the administration to make sure we have regular updates, maybe more frequently initially, just so that we can inform the public, and then also have a plan moving forward as to what regular intervals will be most helpful.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't think we want to be in a situation where we were to move towards a capital improvement program and, we've got folks or schools that have had the same issue for years at a time and that, the investment hasn't been made. As long as, again, we need to very much involve the schools, involve the communities at those respective schools, and involve both their leadership and parents and their building managers and things of that nature, as well as our maintainers, and make sure. I think we could be very, very comprehensive, very, very swiftly relative to what's going on, and we could have a very, very nice document that we can reference going forward, and we can have the historical where we started to where we go.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
I just have, since we're in pregnant pause mode, one more question. and I'm trying to, I don't even know quite how to phrase the question, so bear with me. Sure that we are trusting and verifying, and ensuring that there is trust being built with the reports that we get and within the realm of our stakeholders.
Well, I think one of the beautiful things about this particular nature is, one, we're going to have, we certainly have the documentation from where Schneider was when they started and their particular approach, and we can build upon that. One of the things I love about their document that we probably haven't spent a whole lot of time on are what are the projects we didn't do. And that's where I would start. That's one of the things where I would start on this is say, hey, at these XYZ schools, what are the things that we could have done or the improvements that could have been made, and where would that have put our situation in terms of whether it be preventative maintenance or repetitive maintenance on this exact same system, as well as move it to an energy efficiency type of paradigm and put us into a situation where, I hope to sort of move us, especially on the Energy Star side of things, because I feel like Energy Star is the most, is the safest, the easiest to use. See how many schools that we have Energy Star rated, and then make sure that they are at a category that they are performing at an Energy Star rating that is getting the credential. That's where LEED again loses a little bit of importance and meaning to what's going on in our schools. But I think between our maintainers and what's going on and what we see out there, in terms of the improvements once we get contractors and other maybe architects and engineers involved in our schools looking at the energy side of things, you balance that back with where the audit said we need to sort of focus on. Believe me, I'm not one to say, hey, XYZ architect said we should do this, so that's what we're going to do. No. We need to make sure that it is a comprehensive look at what's going on between our professionals, between third-party professionals, and then between the professionals that we contract to do this. At no point do I feel like sort of somebody has a magic wand and can sort of predict what is going on and where we need to be 5, 10, 15 years from now relative to our systems. We can't predict where the code's going to go. We can't predict where the general nature of architectural realm and what's going on with what's going on in classrooms and the accommodations that we need to provide. Even in technology and audiovisual systems, I would argue that nobody probably would have thought that we were going to have technology as ubiquitous as we find it today. So that needs to be part of this comprehensive approach. Oh, absolutely.
So last year, a bill passed called the Building Benchmark Bill. Did that was passed. And the state is going to be requiring commercial entities, local government, for facilities over 50,000 square feet to provide kilowatt hour usage every December annually from here on out, actually through the Energy Star portfolio. And the state is requiring kilowatt hour really maximums essentially for those facilities of that size because the state's greenhouse gas reduction and all the pushes with the House and the Senate passing energy conservation bills. So that's been very recent. But they're going to be enforcing school districts to follow that. And Chris is going to be leading that charge. So it's just another reason to consider an investment like this, especially when it's pretty much mandated. And like Chris said, we're monitoring the utility data as well. So it's a perfect place to start from a baseline standing to understand how far we've come, but it's also a good way to show the community, look how far we still need to go. So just one piece that's a factor that's outside of all of our control that is going to have to be.
Yeah, all the data that you're seeing right now, none of the Schneider impact and the impact of the changes that we've made recently is included there. That's historical.
So what's nice is that we actually have focus, and we'll have reports that are meaningful. The credibility over time will grow. Maybe we could move forward, though, to the next part of the presentation,
Yes. Will?
Absolutely, yes. Thank you, Chris. And I will be quick, I promise. Chris really did a great job in setting John and I up here. John, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Well, if you do have to jump off at any point, I know you're running right now, not literally running, but running around, just let us know. But I'm getting started here on the presentation, so I'll bring the mic down here. Awesome. If I bring this. Thank you. So to follow up on Chris, he was beginning to speak about some of the project updates. So our team has been working fast and furious with really Chris and Leo over, of course, this past summer primarily. So Dr. Somers and his team wanted just us to come in and provide a quick update to where we're at and where we're to come. John Stancliffe is on the line. He is our project construction manager for this energy efficiency and comprehensive project solution. So I'm going to provide a little bit of an update there, and John's going to talk through some of the scope of work. Just looking up here as a recap for those that are newer in the room here, at the beginning of all of this, our team focused on how can we understand where Lewis Palmer School District is going in regards to how they're developing their strategic vision, where they want to set their priorities in regards to, like Chris was mentioning, capital, asset planning, but also how that correlates with how it benefits the learning environment. And goals 1, 4, and 5 of the district's strategic visions were the ones that really stood out to us and where we see direct project connection. And of course, with most recent news of potentially going to voters this November for that success and also beyond, we want to be able to show that the district is taking initiatives and doing absolutely the best that it can with the resources it has to be able to achieve these goals. So we're tangibly finding ways to message and communicate how this project initiative, although some of it's not very visual and seen, like replacing a boiler, can still make an impact in how it's achieving a strategic vision. So I just wanted to have that recap up there. Now, what's being shown here is that comprehensive, larger scope of work, line by line item. And I want to just define this. This is a very high level look at this scope. Chris did a nicer job in really deteriorating down the exact percentages of sort of where we're at. But in regards to lighting, as well as a lot of those miscellaneous solutions, the functionality, the feasibility, and the use of that equipment is there and ready to go. Especially around the lighting side, the district, although it's not being measured right now by our team, is already seeing energy and operational savings now very, very recently, probably prior to some of the statistics that Chris was showing up there. But it's great to know that even before all of construction is finalized and wrapped up, that is already taking place. So what's really remaining is heavily on the building automation system, as well as a lot of the HVAC work there. John, I'm going to turn it to you for a second. I know you're looking at the scope of work. If there were any specifics you wanted to also mention around the progress of the work this summer in regards to that, now would be the time.
I think the most significant thing is we've had procurement issues with automation components. That has started to clear up, and now we have a path to get everything done, hopefully by the end of this year. So we're looking good on the automation side. We thought we were going to have some significant delays, but now we are looking at getting additional crews to install.
And for those that are familiar, of course, in the construction world, the supply chain world right now, we were looking at expecting several delays. But yeah, fortunately, again, we're working with the best resources that we can, and John's done a great job in managing those expectations, as well as working alongside Chris and Leo there. So again, really the main focus this fall is wrapping up the mechanical and automation as they do go hand in hand with one another.
And to be clear then, the blue and the yellow that's either in progress or not started should all be completed by the end of the calendar year?
That is the goal, yes.
Okay.
That is the goal.
When does the actual measurement process begin?
Right. So the measurement begins once construction is complete. So our goal is by early 2023 to be able to essentially hand the project over to our measurement and verification team, as well as to the Colorado Energy Office to say this construction is complete. We can now begin that guarantee period, which we then start measuring and verifying the utility baseline costs to the savings that the district is now receiving. And I'll talk a little bit more of that on the next slide, actually.
So this, again, ties back to what Chris was talking about, is this becomes part of our metrics that we're going to have, and this is a great starting point, going to the original work and saying what didn't get, what's not included. So it really does tie well together with everything you've said. Excellent. And I appreciate Grace Best district offices and maintenance and transportation.
And kudos to Chris for really working with us in emphasizing including Grace Best. We originally thought this was a school we would not touch or pay any attention to, but he really saw the value of including and adding in lighting there to emphasize the savings component. So kudos there. So this chart here, looking I don't know what the right word is for it here, but a little more self-explanatory in a way. But last time we presented, I believe it was Ron, asked for some idea or a look for how savings and cost would line up over the next 20 years. This is, again, a higher level look of what that is. This chart represents Schedule G in the energy performance contract. It's a cash flow or an amortization schedule. But essentially starting at that guarantee period, that is the beginning of year one, we are starting to measure those savings. I believe first year savings are just over $350,000 in energy and operational savings, and it is exactly budget neutral and the same number as the first year annual payment that the district will be making as a repayment as a part of its loan in that financing. Now, that is the guaranteed number of the savings there. What I want to echo is that if you recall from the IGA presentations I gave way back when, we talked about the guarantee, which is essentially the minimum required amount of savings that our team has to measure to ensure that that we're following state statute, that we're meeting the Colorado Energy Office's requirements, and that we're essentially doing what we're supposed to be doing. But what I also talked about in those IGA meetings was projected savings that the district would more than likely see on top of the guarantee. The guarantee, like I mentioned, is essentially a minimum amount that must be required. But at the end of the day, we're expecting closer to about 10% higher in annual savings from that number that you see there. And what we'll do, especially over the next 3 years once construction's complete, is that we'll quantify what those excess savings versus the payments are going to look like and go back to the district and say, over the last 3 years, on top of the savings from those payments, the district has seen $100,000, $200,000 in additional excess savings that could go right back into the general fund, right back into the district's pocket, and that follows its trend through the life of the project. So I just want to echo that because I know the bars each year are essentially line for line, maybe exactly right till the very end there. But again, that is part of the guarantee. The projected is going to be higher than that. So I just wanted to echo that. We'll have something more specific to share, especially as we're wrapping up into the measurement and verification. But for the sake, just to give an update, that is a high-level look of what that is.
So let's assume we're starting measurement in January, which is mid-fiscal year. Would we have a year zero for that first half year and then switch this to a fiscal year approach? Because it just, the timing of being done and so forth.
That's a great question. I don't know. I don't have an answer, but I can absolutely try and see, because from my knowledge, it's always pretty much been once we hand it over to our measurement and verification team as well as to the energy office, that day one is when we go. But in the case where the fiscal years need to line up, I'm sure we can create an analysis that lines it up there, but this district's still going to be seeing savings. So maybe we can call it a year zero, where it's still technically part of that. And then once fiscal year July 1 begins, that would be considered year one. But I could get an answer for you on that.
Brett, do you have any preference around how we report that or how we start that measurement process?
Well, I agree with you that fiscal year, getting on a fiscal year cycle would be best. I mean, although there will always be some things that will be on a calendar year basis, and then we'll have to adjust that in-house in terms of how we present it. So it could go either way, but I think for this particular item, because we're trying to demonstrate cost impact, lining it up with the fiscal year would be best. So let's talk about that more on Thursday.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. All right. Awesome. So a lot of text on the screen here. I'll work through it one by one. I always like talking about what's coming up, what sort of events, what kind of messaging and communication, as we know it's a big piece of this project initiative. Back in May, our team, our West team, so this consisted of the state of California, Arizona, and Colorado, got together, and we essentially kicked off what we're calling our Day of Service event for one school district that our entire team has worked with in 2021. And I literally watched them pull it out of a hat. They selected Lewis Palmer School District. It was really exciting to see because Chris and I had a prior conversation about it just to get an idea of what we were going to be speaking through. And D38 was selected. Now, the idea behind this is that we would have our engineering as well as development team come out to Lewis Palmer School District sometime around mid-October. I think we're deciding right after fall break to complete a series of activities as well as events and more volunteer-based in order to Some of the things we talked about was moving materials from one school to the next. We know there's a lot that needs to come here to Grace Best Elementary, as well as potentially including events that are based around renewable energy education, so more student engagement oriented, as well as potentially composting activities for the school's gardening club. So right now we're working internally on our team to decide what kind of materials and equipment we're ready to bring out to Lewis Palmer for that day, but we're working closely with Jess McAllister and Chris on that process development, you would say. But we're really excited about it too, because it actually lines up exactly with the thing that's below it is our post-project video. So our marketing director has procured a great production team, professional production crew to come out and film really a video, a 2 to 3 minute short clip video that highlights the benefits of the project, but it also captured footage of the day of service event. And of course, most importantly, getting inside of buildings and taking footage of the improvements that are happening and what it means to the district. Now, the great thing here is that we can put this thing everywhere. We can get local media involved, especially if we're talking about it being the fall. We're trying to get the message out to the community of Monument, the Tri-Lakes, of what's going on. This is a great way to be able to share that kind of message. So we're really excited to have that developed. Now, it does take a little time for that video to finalize and be developed. I don't exactly know when, but I know Mark and I have had several conversations about that so far, so we'll be continuing that process over the next month or so. One thing that'll be coming more recently or upcoming is our principal newsletter. So one thing that Chris actually came up with the idea, but we also thought it was a really good idea. We're going to be developing a one-pager for all principals and teachers to be able to understand exactly what the scope of work inside of their classrooms has been developed. Also, on top of that, the benefits of the project, in case there isn't that awareness of understanding, hey, why do my lights look different? It feels different in here. I'm curious, what is going on? So we'll be able to have that kind of knowledge displayed for teachers and principals so they can be able to share it. We'll have a QR code in the bottom right of that flyer that'll be able to go right to the district website page that has our information, as well as the prior presentations that we've been delivering. We're actually hoping that's done by the end of this week. So I'm working, again, with our marketing team on seeing if we could have that done by then.
Does that include the Grace Best improvement in light?
Yes, absolutely.
Because there are families and students involved there.
Absolutely. It'll include the improvements that were done there and the savings component as well.
Excellent.
Lastly, we're hosting our second annual Students in STEAM event, which is greater than just Lewis Palmer. We're asking more students and school districts to come out to Colorado Springs this fall. Last year we had 7 school districts, including D38. D38 really led the charge, but we're going to be hosting that again this October. So we're hoping that we get some students again from D38 to come. Got some great footage there that we can share with the marketing team. So more communication, more messaging. So that's really the basis of what I had. I know Chris did a nice job talking more through the technical of what's been done, what's still to come. But again, we're really hoping by the end of this calendar year, we're at a really good place where we can come back in the early 2023 and say that we're ready to start measuring those savings. Any questions or thoughts for John or I as we're here?
The day of service is exciting. That's
Yep.
really exciting.
Yeah.
Cool.
Talking through some composting, some fun little solar garden type ideas.
Teresa, do you have any questions or comments?
No, I just appreciate the update. Thanks so much.
Agreed. I don't think there's any other questions, but we appreciate the presentation, the update, John being online with us. We appreciate the donuts. I'll pass those out here in a moment. And we appreciate you coming and sharing this with us. And most importantly, the progress, the efforts, the results, right? I mean, it's hard to really put all of those results in a presentation. And so I appreciate the effort of doing that. But moreover, I appreciate the impact it's having at our facilities.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Yep. Thank you.
Our next agenda item is B2, Academic Data Review. And Amber, I guess we'll...
Grab the clicker from you.
And welcome, Michael.
Thank you.
So for Teresa's benefit and those that are live streaming, Dr. Michael Braum is with Amber Wetstein today doing this presentation. Thank you.
Good morning. Dr. Brahm and I are very excited to present our state assessment results to you this morning, and we're hoping this will really be kind of a conversation so that we can answer questions that you may have regarding our results, and we'll be co-presenting. We do have an activity built in. After we go through the slides, then we will engage you in looking a little bit more deeply at how our students performed on the standards for CMAS. These are the assessments that our students participated in this past spring. You'll notice the asterisk by science, so our students did participate in the science assessment. However, we do not yet have results, as this was the first implementation of a test with new items aligned with new science standards. In this visual, you will see District 38's performance, and this is district-wide performance, the percentage of students who met or exceeded standards as compared to the percentage of students statewide. So you can see that District 38 performed very well on this assessment. And similarly in math, for grades 3 through 8 on the CMAS assessment, you will see D38's performance compared to statewide. I'll pause on this visual a little bit, and I may have Dr. Brahm jump in, but what we wanted to point out is that looking back to 2019, pre-pandemic, that was the last assessment series that students took before COVID. You'll remember that no students tested in 2020. And then only a portion of students participated in 2021, and it was based on grade level and content area. So we'll just let you kind of process this graphic a little bit, and we'll answer questions that you may have. What we're trying to illustrate is that third graders in 2019 are now sixth graders. Well, I should say current seventh graders, correct, Dr. Brahm? The assessment in 2022 was when they were sixth graders, and those are current seventh graders.
A question on the previous couple slides where D38 is ranking higher than the state averages. I'm assuming what that means?
Average of students meeting and exceeding, correct.
What's the participation level in this within our district?
We will show you that.
Okay,
we can jump ahead, or we do have a slide on that
I'll
we
wait.
can
I'll
speak
wait.
to.
So when I look at that slide up prior, not that one, this one, yes. So make sure so if we look at grade 5 ELA test score of 66.2%, and then when they became eighth graders, their test scores are 55.7, okay.
That is correct. So you will notice some decreases in performance levels, and this will just be one data point to consider. We just received our school performance frameworks on Friday, and those are embargoed. We're not able to share those with you publicly until later this week. But you will see, while there were some decreases in student performance over time, our district performed extremely well and did not lose ground on our overall performance over the past few years. I think that's all I can share with you on that for right now, but we're looking forward to sharing those reports with you soon. Okay, so those past few slides, and Dr. Brahm, feel free to jump in here. The past few slides were regarding our achievement levels, but we also care very much about how our students are growing. When we talk about every student every day, we're wanting to make sure every student, whether they are high performing or maybe need additional support, that they are all growing. And we mark that with a median growth percentile of 50, meaning that is where we would expect an average student to grow, similarly to what we might consider a year's growth. Not exactly that way, but that's where we would be aiming, is to have a median growth percentile at 50. So you can see the performance of each of our elementary and middle schools here, and where we grew students on average. This was for the English language arts assessment. And then again, with the 50th percentile marked for you, you can see we had some excellent growth in math as well. Now, do you want to speak a little bit to participation and considerations with growth?
Sure. One of the things for us to look at with CMAS MGP, median growth percentile, is that this is basically students who have taken the test 2 consecutive years, and that by each building, that is looking at all of the grade levels within that building. Going back to the cohort data, one of the things that I do want to mention about this is that although we're looking at 2019 grade 3, for example, and comparing that to 2022 grade 6, that is not necessarily a true cohort. So many of those students are the same students, but we would have to pair up every single student if we were to look at it in true cohort context. Good. Right. So looking at the participation rates, for CMAS ELA, our participation rates in grades 3 through 8, which is where we have CMAS for ELA, we are below the state. Our goal is typically 85%. Guidance from CDE is typically that we are looking for an 85% participation rate to make generalizations. That being said, we can run statistical analysis, and as we have larger schools, the participation rate can fall below 85%, and we are still able to make generalizations. We are seeing a bigger decrease in participation starting in grade 6, and that also is evident in grades 7 and 8. And when we look at CMAS math on the next slide, we see the same thing. Participation rates at or above 85% is what our goal is. For college readiness results, all right.
Before
Please.
you leave participation rates, so I noticed on the slide, the CMath math growth or the CMass ELA growth slides, that the MA elementary and MA secondary are quite low for both. Does that have anything to do with participation rates?
That would depend on which students are participating. I think participation rate is always going to be a factor, and the larger the percentages of those who do participate, the more valid that data is going to be. But nonetheless, I mean, we still want all of our schools to be at or above 50th.
Understood, but when I get to participation rates and I see across the board we're less than the state participation rates, is that driven by MA participation? Or is MA's participation comparable to the neighborhood schools?
MA's participation rate is below the other neighborhood schools. I do believe that last year we did see a stabilization or an increase in some areas with regard to the participation rate. Last year, MA Elementary piloted taking CMAS online for the first time. And if I recall, I believe that MA Secondary will probably be doing that as well this year.
Which improves their participation? Or?
I wouldn't say that necessarily improves the participation rate, but I do know that for the first time this coming school year, all of our schools will be taking CMAS online, and I'm hopeful that our participation rate will improve. One of the things that we're going to be doing in the coming weeks is having grade level meetings with grades 3 through 6 to start, and we're going to be looking at some data that we're going to look at here shortly as a group to look at alignment of how CMAS and our textbooks, our state standards, and all of that aligns so that we can look at making more use and more sense out of our CMAS data. It's really good data, and we need to do more with that data. I know that right now, we, in the past, have had a lot of emphasis on MAP data, which is the NWA test. But those two tests serve different purposes, and there's really a synthesis that we need to do to show the value in both types of tests, and we'll do that here in the coming week.
Thank you. That's helpful. Very.
I'll let you continue. You're doing a great job.
All right. Okay. So college readiness results. Right now, what we're looking at on this slide is the 2022 PSAT 9 evidence-based reading and writing college and career readiness. And what these bar graphs represent are the percent of students who are meeting college and career readiness benchmarks for grade 9 evidence-based reading and writing. The state is at 60%. And as evidenced here, Lewis Palmer, MA Secondary, and Palmer Ridge are all at or above 82%. For PSAT 10, the state percent is 67, and all of our schools are at or above 76%. For the
Oh, that's grade 9, grade 10. Never mind.
Yes, grade 9 and grade 10. And SAT is grade 11, and we only have Lewis Palmer and Palmer Ridge because MA Secondary did not have grade 11 last year, but they will this year. And as you can see, both of our high schools are at or above 78%, with the state being at 57%. For math, starting with PSAT 9, the state percent was 41% of students meeting college and career readiness benchmarks. And in Lewis Palmer, all three of our schools were at or above 62. For PSAT 10 math, the state percent was 40%, and all of our schools were at or above 56%. And for SAT, again, MA Secondary did not have SAT tests last year for grade 11, but will this year. The state percent was 35, and Lewis Palmer High School and Palmer Ridge were at or above 54%.
I'm curious, is there a national percent?
There is a total percent, but it depends on the kind of reports. I'd have to go back and look to see what that metric looks like and see if that data is available. Some of the reports include national data and some do not.
And whether or not they're meaningful, but that's the curiosity is. are
Yeah,
they
and I'll
meaningful?
just mention that not all states require these assessments, so that can also be a consideration in looking at how we compare nationally. Because nationally, students are electing to take the SAT for college entrance versus it being a state-required assessment. So something to think about there as well.
Well, and to build on what you just said, some colleges are, I don't want to say eliminating, postponing the requirement for some of these tests for admissions because of COVID. How is that? What does that mean to us, right? To our school system?
Well, and in the past, it's always been a factor, not only in admissions, but also in scholarship applications. And, we have seen an increase in test optional, but recently there have been some schools that have actually reversed that because what they found is that students were being admitted that weren't necessarily college and career ready. And what we always encourage our students to do when they become juniors, and not only for college, because there's also the career readiness piece to that, is that when they're juniors, the SAT is in Colorado in April is the only opportunity that they can have to take that test for free. And so taking advantage of that is wise. And also with the Colorado graduation guideline requirements, the SAT is one test or one way that students can meet that requirement. And so just for example, 2 years ago where we had a number of students who had opted out, who were part of the first cohort of Colorado graduation guidelines, we had 40 that had opted out who had not yet met the state requirement for math and or English. And so when they returned to seniors, they had that competency to meet. It doesn't mean that the SAT would have guaranteed them meeting that requirement, but that was a lost opportunity. And so what we're really doing, and as you'll see later when we get to the participation rates, our high school participation rate on the PSAT 8-9, PSAT 10, and the SAT was above the state participation rate. Our high school's participation rate was higher than the state, which is the opposite of what we saw in grades 3 through 8 for CMAS.
So my last question was more of a leading question that you didn't quite get to, so it wasn't a very good leading question. Is there any data that reflects the impact of COVID on our school system? Lewis Palmer School District, not the state, just us locally.
I would say that all of this data, it indicates that we were able to educate students throughout the pandemic with a very high success rate when you're looking at how we performed compared to the state. And I think you'll see even more of that when we're able to explain the school performance frameworks to you and where we rank comparatively statewide. So
How hard, and is it even possible to get our peer group? So we've got this peer group that we use for comparing compensation, and they're neighboring school districts, right? How hard would it be for us to compare our results through 2019 through 22 to some of our peer groups, just to see if we're similar or better?
we could certainly put something together on that, absolutely. We could share something on September 19th that indicates how we compared to some of those groups.
And the reason I'm going there is not just to be number one, which is I hope what we are, but it's really to see where could we have improved or done, what can we learn from it, right? I mean, that's the aim.
Okay, so Dr. Brahm mentioned participation rates for the College Board assessments. Again, this was the evidence-based reading and writing exams. And then again, we had higher than state participation in math as well. Okay, questions before we engage you in looking a little bit closer at performance with standards? Okay, I'm going to have us group up, if executive team members could group up with board members, so maybe we will have 3 groups. And what we'd like you to do is to move to one of the posters that you see around the room, and we're going to bring you a reflection sheet if you'd like to take notes on it. Dr. Brahm engaged school leadership teams a couple of weeks ago in looking very closely at not only the overall performance like we just shared with you, but looking very closely at the question types aligned to the academic standards at each grade level in both English language arts and math to see how our students were performing by standard compared to the state. And what you're going to take a look at is a SWOT analysis that was conducted by school leadership teams. We'd like you to think about what you notice, your observations and any questions that come up. And we're only going to take about 5 minutes to do this, but we'd ask you to rotate with your group so that you can just get a glimpse of each of the posters, and then we'll come back and discuss. And once you get to your poster, I'll let Dr. Brahm explain a little bit about those charts and what your look-fors will be.
And Teresa, I'll take a picture of these and then we'll text them to you.
Oh, I was going to see if somebody wants to just carry my phone around with Teresa on your hand.
Oh, have you join a group?
Yeah. Although Teresa, I guess that you can't actually see it.
Yeah, do you want to, I don't want to hinder you either, so if you want to call me back.
Okay, sure. Okay, I'll call you right back.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
We're back.
Okay, super. Thank you.
Okay, as we get back started, for the community that may be listening, we just spent some time looking at our performance on individual academic standards by grade level, taking a look at work that our school leadership teams did in creating a SWOT analysis and recognizing areas where we are performing very well, as well as opportunities for improvement related to those academic standards. Any questions or discussion on the activity we just participated in? And then any other questions that you may have, we're happy to entertain as well.
So I can start. I found the in-depth information really helpful to see the content areas as it goes through on the charts. I found that extremely helpful and enlightening, because one of my curiosities, which I'm sure we'll learn later, was, well, we handled the pandemic a little differently than a lot of our peers throughout the state. So did that pay off? And when we're looking at some of the content areas that they were learning, if we see that we're above the state on one line, but we see a dip in another, why is that? Is that because they're just learning it at a different time of the year? Making sure we're not teaching to the test, but also making sure, are we teaching where we need to?
Could you share with us who went through these exercises in these various, this is grade level, each one of these is a different grade level. Who participated?
So each August, in late August, we have a data dig with all of the building leadership teams, and they invite usually 2 or 3 other people from their team, and then we participate in this work. When we did this work on August 25th, we did it specifically for district data. So we looked at entire grade level, and buildings received building-specific reports that they can then use in their buildings.
Dr. Brahm is bringing together teachers. He's doing this work at school buildings, as well as he is going to be bringing together teachers from each grade level to look at this data together across the district. And I don't have those dates off the top of my head, but it's within the next couple of weeks that we're going to be including teachers in this work. The other thing I'll mention is that in your executive materials, the board has access to all of this data by school. So if you're interested in looking at it closer, that is not for public consumption, but you can take a look at that if you'd like.
So, you know, what would be interesting, if it's not too much effort, would be at our regular board meeting to have a picture of the facility, the school, with a list or, you know, of all those who participated, whether it's the principal, the teachers, whomever, right? It would be interesting because, to me, kudos to them. And I'd like to be able to do that district-wide so that everyone could see at each of these facilities who was involved in this work, which I think is right at the fundamental level of education. So I think it would be awesome to have some recognition, if possible.
We can absolutely do that.
Teresa, did you have any questions, comments? Is she back online?
Yeah, I'm here. Just maybe I'd love to hear, Amber, your reflections on college and career readiness results and data that we see, knowing that it's all very helpful and relevant, but also how that relates, or how we are thinking about articulating the whole picture with regard to Portrait of a Graduate and fully representing those students in the district that may not be headed to college but are taking what we might consider non-traditional tracks.
That's a good question. I do think I can share quite a bit more with some of that data on the 19th when we take a look at our matriculation rates. There is a large percentage of students who are choosing other options than 4 and 2-year colleges, and we'll be able to look a little more closely at that on September 19th. And I think you bring up a really good point in how are we going to be measuring the success of our students who are graduating beyond the College Board assessments. We do have a partnership underway with the Colorado Education Initiative, who will be facilitating additional focus groups and input sessions into vetting the work that we've done so far with the portrait of a graduate, and also extending that to a portrait of an educator. And as part of that work, we will be able to identify indicators that our students are meeting those requirements for success after high school. So I know I'm not completely answering your question, but I think it's a good point that these assessment scores are just one indicator as we look at student achievement, and we are working to broaden that to include all of the soft skills and essential skills that our students will need for success after high school.
Thank you. Yeah, I just think it's an important continuing conversation to have. And, you know, as the world is changing, as our students are doing many, many more different things than what I think a lot of us did as we were growing up. I think the approach is different, but then how do we as a team make sure that we're doing everything we can to provide hopefully what every student every day needs, but and knowing that there may be ways to measure things that are much different than what we have traditionally done or that what's required by the state. So I think it's a great conversation to continue having moving forward.
Yeah, Teresa, just wanted to piggyback off of that, because I think that's exactly why the importance of a portrait of a grad work is so fundamental, because it's so much more comprehensive than just one data point. So I think that's what will help drive those conversations, is what are those skills and competencies as they are defined, and then how are we looking at success? And I'll add, not just at high school, right? This is something that can start as early as preschool and see evidence of demonstration of those competencies throughout an entire continuum of learning for each of our students. So I think the power of that is still yet to be realized. And then this just helps complement our understanding of where our students are at in their given choice, right? We want every student to have or leave the system with the competencies that enables them for success into college if they so choose, but we recognize that's not the path for all of our kids either. So I just think you're right on with that, and the portrait of the grad, profile of the grad, will really help drive that.
Right. Yeah. No, thanks. I look forward to continuing conversation around that realm.
Thank you, Teresa. Tiffany, did you have any comments or questions?
No, I shared my comments. It was interesting to see the difference in grade levels, 6th grade and then 7th grade, and just nothing beyond what I shared.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. That's everything else supports you. Everything else we talk about is to support you. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Our next agenda item is B3. Brett Ridgway is going to give us an update here on pay schedule development and/or this D38 compensation update.
I was just going to say, Vicky's taking care of it, so you're good. No, go for it.
Okay, so thank you, and are we okay on time? I know we're at time, so you want the express version?
Express would be good.
Okay. So first of all, compensation basics, and I took this data from the August payroll, which was just last week. The first number is incorrect. Instead of 753 people, it should say 899 people.
How many?
899. That includes substitutes and literally every person. If you haven't heard, I'll be surprised, but last month's payroll wasn't a great payroll for us. The processes weren't good. There was quite a few issues that we had to triage after the fact. Upwards of 100 plus people needed an adjustment in one way or another, and that unfortunately is reflective of just some fragility in the processes in the business office, in between HR and finance both, and things that need to get shorn up as we move forward. In terms of this particular topic, we wanted to talk about the pay schedules. I think with some nod to the fact that the mill levy override question has been placed on the ballot, and then so how are we planning if that were to pass? How are we planning if that were to not pass? And what we do with the pay schedules in each of those events. What's interesting here about, I call them regular employees, so that is a good number. So 899 versus 736 says there's 150 folks that work around the school district that are substitute, that are kind of daily workers, if you will. But of the 736 regular employees, 94% of them have their base pay derived from a pay schedule. So that's good. That provides structure and consistency for us, and some clarity and transparency for the staff as well. In terms of the basics, what we have are two main schedules, the licensed schedule and the classified schedule. Licensed schedule for the educators, it has a traditional tiered steps and lane design, 10 lanes horizontally, 33 steps vertically, 275 total cells available for that. The classified schedule is actually a conglomeration of 48 individual schedules, each for a specific role or roles. There's from 17 to 26 steps, so there's a little bit of inconsistency in the current design of them, but across 48 schedules and that many steps, there's 1,000 different cells available. Each schedule should have a base from which the resulting cell amounts are measured. That's what the base is on a classified schedule. Just topically what it is. That's the minimum wage. Minimum wage should be the base on the classified schedule. And that's an interesting change from, that's happened since Amendment 73, is it used to be when you said you were a minimum wage employee, that had some real negative connotation to it. Right now, if you're a minimum wage employee, you're the only one that's guaranteed a pay raise every single year. It's a totally different perspective right now. And I don't think culturally we've made that change yet, but that is something to keep in mind. That minimum wage is not static. It's not one of those things that you are chained to, maybe like it might have been perceived in the past. Oh. Okay. Very good. So let's walk through the schedules themselves, the license schedule. What is it? What are the implications? What are the ideals that are really implied and inferred by the fact that it exists and the way that it's designed? The fact that there's a step system establishes that additional experience results in a more qualified teacher, a more valued teacher. That's the vertical orientation to the schedule. The horizontal orientation, the lane system establishes that additional formal training results in a more qualified or a more valued teacher in terms of compensation. The tiered design of the steps and lanes, and what I'm speaking to there is that there are caps that each lane has until you get to the far right, and I'll show you that here in a second on the visual. But that tiered system creates an incentive for a teacher to move across the schedule, to pursue those additional trainings, those additional hours, because the system believes, again, that results in a more qualified, a more valued teacher, and so the schedule has that design built into it. The bottom bullet point then is that the math of the schedule should utilize a strategy that reflects these established priorities. The classified schedule is not the same, because although there is a step system, there is no lane system in general. There are some incidents, some cases, I believe, that I'm still getting familiar with, where additional steps may be granted, or differentials may be granted if a role has additional training or certifications. But it's not really evident through the schedule design in and of itself. This third bullet point is really an important one, especially in these times that we're living in now, when it's about rank ordering roles. And what we see is that the employable community is perceiving roles differently than what they have traditionally been. When we see higher vacancies in things like SPED para roles, it's kind of becomes not a supply and demand, but a demand and supply reality. And I intentionally flip those around. What is the demand for the roles? What is the supply that we are receiving? And if that is not sufficient, that is telling us something about the perceived value or the need for additional value in that role. One of the things that we typically see, for instance, is we typically don't have difficulties hiring school front office workers, but we have a lot more difficult time, again, hiring para roles, especially SPED para roles. So that means that a re-ranking or a separation of that gap is probably going to be necessary in the future. So demand and supply really will drive that rank ordering of roles. Potential designs of schedules. This is one of my favorite things when it comes to designing pay schedules, and I have designed pay schedules for new pay schedules and rebuilt and modified existing pay schedules. There are really two simple paths you can take. One being a fixed dollar strategy, meaning as you go down steps or go across lanes, that there's a fixed dollar increment. You can take the opposite approach of a fixed percentage change. Each of those has its benefits of being simple. Each of it has its huge limitations of different franchising certain segments of the staff. And so pursuing that simplistic strategy, just for the reason of being it simple and easy to remember, usually has too many costs to it. And so what is then the best design? The best design is probably neither one of those. Here is a schedule of where our licensed staff are at on the schedule. Again, you can see the tiered design as we move from left to right down the schedule. The red lines on there separate that into quadrants. But really, statistically, what we're seeing here is there's two highlighted cells that show the statistical average. And for teachers, our statistical average place for them to be is the MA Step 10, where we have 15 people currently. The most frequent, most populated cell is BA Step 2, meaning last year's hires that are still with us this year. So that's good that we've been able to retain. But these quadrants, what we see here is kind of a statistical, not smooth. I'm not thinking of a good word to say that. But in the upper left quadrant, you see 40% of the teaching staff is in the upper left. The lower right has 30%, and the lower left has 22, and that upper right has only 8. So taking a schedule like this and making changes to it that will benefit all people is not really going to be possible. So we have to be very strategic in how we want to do changes for this. So what is the best design? I believe it's a blended schedule that takes the middle approach of it's not fixed percentage, it's not fixed dollars. It looks for something in between that honors as much as we can both camps, if you will, meaning what are the newer staff, less experienced staff, and what are our veteran staff, more experienced staff earning, and how is their pay change happening every year. So you can see that flat percent changes here on the license schedule. the flat percentage changes. This shows one of the problems of that flat percentage change, because the lower stepped, lower laned roles would only get certain dollars, and the higher stepped, higher lane roles would get much more dollars to have that consistent percentage. So typically what I prefer to design is something that has a blended strategy to it, so that's a higher percentage with lower dollars and the lower pay rates, and a higher dollar, lower percentage pairing in the upper pay rates. So this moderates the disparity between the experience segments. The con is here that it's less intuitive. Of course, it's difficult. It's not so simple. But if it is scheduled, then at least the pattern can be established and be visible and transparent. So on those two, we do have a third group, actually really a third and a fourth group of staff, and there is some pay schedule backing to that, and that would be administrative and professional technical pay. What professional technical pay is, what I like to remind people of is that it's roles that are not so captive to education. It's things like education, it's things like human resources, it's things like finance, things like technology. These are things that all companies have, not just education. And so that is a different competitive environment that we're operating in, and so it's worthy of having a different pay schedule then as a result. Administration, of course, is just what it sounds in terms of school leadership and district leadership, and having schedules that are established for all of these roles, again, just helps provide the full staff with a good sense of comfort that there is design, there is intention to how pay is set, and more importantly, how pay changes from year to year. So a game plan for revising the current schedules, if you were to be interested in this, was to establish a committee of representative of various employee segments for a series of meetings that we could have over the course of the fall and on into the new year, so that we can talk about this, provide good information and context, so we can have informed conversations and make observations and recommendations to the Board of Education, because of course it's this body, the Board of Education, that makes these decisions. But I think you all would appreciate that type of background and perspective being brought forward to you for those decision purposes. And overall, to be aimed for an implementation for the next school year and fiscal year.
So Brett, I've followed the presentation and I appreciate it. The current licensed schedule, it has steps and then it has educational or hours of training. And I've gone through here, and nowhere in here have you mentioned performance. Is there a way in the education environment that there's a third dimension of performance-based compensation that would reward our best teachers and not just make a guaranteed step based on time and what level of education I've attained? In other words, those are both based on things that have nothing to do with our kids, frankly. And if this is really kids first, right, which is, I hear it all the time, well, then I want the best teachers possible to be recognized and rewarded. Now, I'll just leave it at that because I've asked you about something that's not here.
No, but I appreciate the question, and it is something that is out there on a lot of people's minds. Obviously, yours, mine as well. And I don't have a good answer, unfortunately, and that's because we've never seen a good answer exist in the world of education, in all honesty. There are districts that have tried, there's districts that have done some things, and they sounded good out of the gates, and unfortunately, they've always had some fatal flaw to them. And so no one's figured it out yet, and I haven't figured it out yet either. It's still on my mind, and I still want to be able to entertain those type of things, but there is honestly nothing that we can look at to say, here is a way, here's something that's successful that can do that.
And with that in mind, your game plan could we add a committee that would look at what we're discussing? And look at some of these failed tries and, even though no one's found it yet, doesn't mean it's not there.
Exactly. It doesn't mean it's not findable. And I think one of the things that might be possible, and I think that's a fine topic to add in terms of the game plan, in terms of the committee that we'd want to have those conversations. And my thought has always been that the opportunity might be to look at certain segments, especially you talk about professional technology. I just mentioned how this is something that's a set of roles that are consistent with the private sector. And of course, the private sector, things are not scheduled this way, generally speaking. And so that might be an employee group, an employee segment that's more used to and or more open to piloting something. So that might be the place where something can germinate and may have the potential to go into other areas of the staff. But again, so having that conversation and checking it out with the staff, I think would be that important first step.
And knowing where it's not worked is good, right? I mean, the more we understand what people have tried and not had success with, the better chances we're not going to repeat that history, right?
Exactly.
But yet we might find something that works. If we don't try, I know what the answer is. It's just more of the same.
One thing I would just like to elevate as that topic becomes socialized, and interestingly, it's come up more informally in some various conversations. Actually, one of those was at our our financial advisory committee, one of our last meetings of the year, last year. And we do have a couple of teachers that sit on that committee. I think what you will hear, and it's really important to consider, not just individual teacher by teacher performance, but when you think about the level of collaboration that goes into all students really achieving at a high level. And certainly we heard earlier today about some really strong performance data, and we look forward to sharing even more of that. There really is a collective, there's a holistic approach to this, as well as individuals who do have very strong performance overall. So I think it's a little bit of a, the further you dive into it, the more you can look at it and appreciate it from multiple angles. But I think the traditional way of looking at individual by individual performance, that might be one angle to challenge a little bit, away from just one by one into more of, you look at most of our schools are predicated right now on really strong teams, so that you have all first grade teachers, for example, working on support for all students learning at a high level. You even have models where kids are being shared throughout the day. It's not just the one classroom that they're assigned to, and so on and so forth. So I just thought I'd mention those things really briefly. It's a really meaty topic, and it's one that actually brings up quite a bit of opinions, both in favor and not. So it's just an important facet, I think, as we're heading into more of that territory.
Indeed. And, middle school, for example, is when those teams become even more formalized, I guess, in the education process. But I think a key here, from my perspective, is this is a process. And we have goals, and that's the growth and achievement of our students. Whether they're high performing, that kind of depends on what their aptitude and what their aim is. So even that, the variations there are not consistent, because we're dealing with individuals.
That's correct.
Across the board, teachers, students, across the board. But if we could find the right process measures, and we know who's involved in the process, that's where I'm going with performance. I'm not talking about individuals. When I say process or performance compensation, it affects individuals, but they're associated with processes. I would like to see, if possible, what those processes are, right? And who are involved in those processes. And, it's obviously, we're not going to pay parents, but I can guarantee you that parents' involvement in the process is probably as critical as any other component. But I think you get the idea
Yeah.
that a teacher or a group of teachers can have an impact on how those parents are involved, whether they're welcoming or whether they think they got it. I mean, there's all sorts of variables. We understand that. That's why I don't think pay, that's the dilemma. The dilemma is pay is an individual check to an individual bank account for an individual person. But yet the performance is never measured that way. And I can understand a myriad of pitfalls around the individual performance level. But if we can find what the process is, the real process that yields the results that we're looking for as a public education system, what are the right measures of those processes, and then teachers are going to monitor this themselves. They know what the aim is. And if we align the process metrics to the aim of the parents and the kids and the teachers, there shouldn't be much conflict. It should just be performance. And it's not one person. None of this is one person. So I agree with what Dr. Summers says, that if you go down the rabbit hole of individual performance, we're doomed, because everybody else has tried that over time. And nobody's found a successful approach yet, even in business. So it doesn't matter if it's education system or in business or in any other place. Individual performance is objective in some ways, but subjective too. So if we could find the process measures that we could somehow build into a system of distinction, right, of great performance, then we might be onto something. I don't know the answer. I'm just throwing out a different perspective.
No, I appreciate that. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Tiffany, any questions or comments on this presentation?
I was looking at, when you're going through this, I think, Chris, if I heard you correctly, you might have hit on it when you talked about establishing a committee. As I recall, that we had teachers back several years ago who formed a committee once before. So ensuring that as they're going through this, that they're looking inside the box and outside the box. And I guess I just want to make sure that when we're doing this representation of the various employees, that how are you ensuring that there's a good representation of different thoughts, ideas, backgrounds within our staff and teachers?
Well, I think first it would be in the design of the membership of the committee, and it's not just a volunteer thing. It's really looking at the demographics and making sure, trying to identify those different perspectives that we want to make sure that are included and pursue them. Make sure that we have that representation covered, and then see, okay, what's the size and scale of that, and then is there room for some at-large or some additional as well. But really, I think pursuing that representation is the most important part of that, and then taking that group that once it's formed and really giving them the great information, the great background, so that they can have a good conversation, a good complete conversation, more objective, less subjective, less emotional. Here are the facts. Here's how school funding works. Here's how funding changes from year to year. Here's how you take new money and run rate money, and what you do, how you can do different with those things, and making sure people get a little bit of a sense of the business of education. And then how can that be translated then into making decisions in terms of pay?
I wanted to make sure that voices are heard through this process. And that would include licensed and certified staff, correct?
Licensed and classified, yes.
And classified, I mean, yeah.
Yes.
And maybe different committees based on elementary versus high school, because it's very different.
We might have subcommittees, but I still would rather want to make
One
sure there's
committee.
one committee of the whole.
Yep.
And then if we can break out if there's interest and need for that.
And the performance-based committee, I'll just throw out an idea since we've got a minute. We could just withhold 10% across the board and then have the right process measures in place, and those who participated in the most optimal performance would get to share the holdback. We just budget it in that way. Nobody's happy with what I just said, and I don't know, I get that, and that's okay, because I'm throwing out an idea.
Right.
And I'm not afraid of a bad idea. I'm just saying there's ways to address
Coming up with a
this.
good idea can often start with
A-
an idea that isn't
Yeah.
feasible or viable.
Exactly. Thank you. Teresa, did you have anything you wanted to comment on or add?
No, not at this time. Thanks.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
Our next agenda item is a preview of the draft agenda for our September 19th meeting. If you don't mind, I would like to ask Dr. Summers and Vicki if we could just have each individual board member, let's send this out again, ask for comments.
Sure.
And do it that way, 'cause since only 3 of us are here.
Okay.
2 in person. So
That's easy enough.
it would be more efficient, I think.
That sounds great.
And then let's jump to B5, which is board member reflections. Teresa, if you don't mind, would you begin, and then Tiffany, and I'll close.
Yeah, I actually don't have any this morning, Chris. Thank you. I appreciate everybody's time and the comprehensive presentations.
Thank you, and be safe in your journey home. Tiffany?
So I have 3 reflections that have stirred up just from this meeting. My first one is related to the discussion we just had. And Chris, when I was thinking about the pros and cons of pay performance discussions, it might, this is just an idea, throwing it out there, but I wonder if at any point in time throughout the school year, some type of town hall meetings where they're similar to our Engage and Elevate, where we talked about diving down deeper into specific subjects. Pros and cons might be helpful in that content of pay performance, because when we were going through, I thought of several hiccups and why and how it wouldn't focus on the student and as compared to who. So just maybe doing Engage and Elevate meetings where we pick a topic that may be of interest to one segment. Maybe somebody wants to come to a pay performance discussion, and another person wants to come to a discussion about buses. If you're following what I'm saying, is having different Engage and Elevates throughout time where we dive deeper, a deeper dive type engagement.
That's our intent.
And then the other thing I was reflecting on, and we were talking about our different schools and our facilities, and we talked about a portrait of a graduate, without putting more on the plates of staff, a portrait of a school. We've talked about how each and every school in our district is unique and has its strengths and its weaknesses and its culture. I'm curious and I'd be willing to head up some type of initiative where PTO or students create their own what makes Lewis Palmer Elementary School, their test scores or their programming, or maybe it's their fall festival, but things that make each school unique. And why I came to that is at the beginning of the school year, you often see parents asking, which school should I send my child to and why? I need advice. So if there's some type of portrait of this is what Prairie Winds Elementary School is, this is who we are, who is Palmer Lake Elementary School, what is Palmer Ridge's strengths, and what is the portrait of Palmer Ridge? So it was an idea I thought about. The portrait of our communities, our school communities. And then the last one was real quick. As we've been discussing, and we hear presentations, and we have all of our staff here at the table, do our staff members have an opportunity, as we're listening, Chris, and Teresa, and we're learning, and we're asking questions, do you staff members have that same opportunity sitting here at this table now? Like, say, Chris had a presentation, and Amber thought, I have a question about that. Is it wise, or do the staff have the opportunity to speak up in the mic and say, Chris, can you explain blah? Or do you guys already have that hashed out beforehand? Or do you just go to each other afterwards? Because there might be some good questions or ideas that we didn't think about.
I can weigh in and just say, generally speaking, we like to review and share our presentations with the team to the extent possible ahead of time. Doesn't always happen exactly that way. But if what you're asking for is more of our participation, just keeping in mind that we're here as a team, I think we are absolutely great with that. I think we're also a little tasked sometimes. So just, yeah, I mean, I think if you're giving us that freedom and flexibility, we're happy to partner in that particular way.
And I would only add that we'd have to cut back on the agenda because we're already 30 minutes late with the agenda we had. So we would have less on the agenda if we had that type of participation. It would just take longer is all. But I agree with the idea, but I think it probably is being handled, as you said, before and after.
And maybe we can call that out on specific topics so that we're intentional about not only the time, but when it's something that can be more collaborative or when it's something that's pretty straightforward and it's just good information and here it is for you.
Those were my reflections.
Tiffany, thank you. And I hope everyone would always feel comfortable in speaking up because I think that was the primary message there. We want everyone to be open in their communications. My reflection is this. Dr. Summers, you got a great team.
Yes, we do. Thank you.
It doesn't surprise me that such good work is being done when I sit here and listen to the presentations, to hear the people that are doing the work share the work they're doing in these presentations. And we're only, like I said earlier, we're only seeing, a presentation. The actual work that's being done is phenomenal. And so thank you on behalf of me as a board member, but I think on behalf of the community, thank you for everyone here. And I truly ask that you extend that gratitude to each of the building administration teams as well.
Considering we have a meeting with them tomorrow, I'll be happy to share that good news and celebration. And on behalf of our team, we're very grateful for that feedback and grateful for all of you as well. So thank you. I know this was a lot to cover. First day back from a long weekend, but we're excited that it was able to be productive and looking forward to those next steps as always.
Perfect. Did you have any reflections that you wanted to share?
None more than what we've already covered. Thank
Excellent.
you for that
So
opportunity.
let's adjourn till September 19th at 6 p.m. at our regularly scheduled board meeting. Thank you all.
Thank you.